Thank you for joining me to discuss my previous research on Latinos in Orlando and my current project, which is documenting the Latino experience and the experience of other immigrants in Memphis, Tennessee. So I want to start by sharing my screen with you. What I'm going to do is walk you through my research process by talking about different images that you're going to see. And then during our live Q&A, I'm happy to go into more detail about anything you might be curious about. Okay, so from Latino Orlando to international Memphis, a transformation in my research project, which goes back to my family. I always start with my family because that's the motivation for studying migration and movement for me. My grandfather on my father's side of the family came to New York City in the 1930s. Was initially living on the island of Puerto Rico, had family in Vieques as well. And my mother's side of the family migrated from Haiti. So both sides come from the Caribbean. Now, the Delerme family was of particular motivation in terms of studying migration patterns amongst Latinos. As I mentioned before, that side of the family is Puerto Rican, and they ended up settling in a Puerto Rican concentrated enclave in New York City, in East Harlem. And my grandfather ended up opening a bodega, which is a small grocery store. And that's what you can see in the image on my screen. So I was interested initially, as I was completing my PhD degree at Rutgers University, in studying East Harlem. I wanted to look at what was happening at the current moment. There was gentrification, there was urban revitalization, there was movement outside of that ethnic enclave, there were luxury condominiums being built, some buildings being brought down. So I was going to study that phenomenon. But demography is destiny. And as the US Census data started to come out and be analyzed by social scientists, I realized that there was a new phenomenon going on. And Puerto Ricans in particular were moving south to Orlando, Florida. And this was not unique amongst the Puerto Rican population. There were other populations that were settling in what people were calling new destinations of migration for Latinos. And so there were terms that people were using to really articulate that this was a new phenomenon. And it wasn't new. There's work by historians that show the presence of Mexicans, for instance, in New Orleans as early as 1910. But a lot of these people didn't remain in the public imagination. Sometimes they assimilated, which was the case in New Orleans. Okay? So there was a forgetting that took place. So again, that census data told me there was a migration happening south, and I decided to follow that migration. And so for my research, for my first book, Latino Orlando, I did ethnographic field work, and that's what cultural anthropologists do. So my book is an ethnography. It's about my experiences, my interpretations of doing field work, collecting data through interviews, from archival materials, participant observation, for about 2 years. And then there were, of course, follow-up visits after that. Now, what really caught my attention and why I study suburbanization is because anthropologist Jorge Duani and historian Felix Matos Rodriguez made a prediction that Puerto Ricans that moved to Orlando, Florida were following a different pattern than previous waves of Puerto Rican migrants, like my grandfather, who settled in places like Chicago or New York City. And what they really highlighted was the social class identity. That's what caught my attention. The fact that these Puerto Ricans that were migrating to Orlando were homeowners. They were moving into suburban neighborhoods where they were not necessarily isolated from individuals who identify as non-Hispanic white. And that was in comparison to, say, New York or Chicago. And they were saying things, and they were quoted as saying that, you know what, sometimes this migration for some of these professionals, it is not just about employment, it's about maintaining or achieving middle-class status. So it was about a lifestyle, and there were so many different push-pull factors that I'm happy to talk about. So I started to delve deeper into one particular development that they identified as being really heavily concentrated with Puerto Ricans. It was called Buenaventura Lakes. And as I started to do research, I discovered an individual who had worked for Landstar Homes, and he was in a very powerful position and was really there from the beginning of the development's inception. So he got to see the growth in the community. But it really started with these individuals that have been labeled as the Mexican millionaires by this particular newspaper that you're seeing in front of you, okay? They ended up building what was really a city-sized subdivision, okay? They reference it as a city, okay? But again, it is in what was a rural part of Osceola County, Florida, okay? The Latino population in the 1980s was somewhere near 2%, okay? By the time I was doing field work, they were close to 50%, if not more. Okay? In the current moment, I'm sure it's exceeded half. There's just been that much growth. Within the particular development, okay, you're talking about 25,000 plus people that are living there by the time I'm doing field work. Okay? But it goes back to these individuals who lived in Mexico, huge developers, and were concerned about what was happening in Mexico. So they wanted to move some of their money and invest in Orlando, Florida. So fast forward to when I'm doing field work, okay, I was interested in this process of Latinization. Okay? Even though it was built by these individuals from Mexico that were part of a consortium of individuals. They had investors from New York. They were working with an attorney from Miami. But what I was interested in was the development over time, that influx of Latinos and the impact they had, what I refer to as Latinization. The impact they had on the landscape. Not only the landscape, the soundscape. Okay? So it was evident, okay, in terms of social life, cultural life, politics, okay, commercial spaces. Here you see a picture of the Public Sabor. This is a supermarket chain, very popular in Florida, the Publix chain. But this particular supermarket caters to the Latino population. So you don't just get one brand of Latin American cheese, for instance. Okay? You get multiple. And that was sometimes a point of contention. This was a space and place that was criticized by some of my key informants because they would go there and they couldn't find an employee who spoke English to them. Okay? They were greeted in Spanish and they found that problematic. And it made them hyper aware of their status as minorities. Okay? So it led to a stronger racial consciousness, a white racial consciousness, because for some of them, this was the first time they were in a situation where they were a minority and they were hearing the Spanish language more frequently sometimes than the English language. Okay? So again, these are some of the things I try to document in the book and the stories that I try and tell. Other incidents I documented. This was a grocery store that had products, but also at the very back of the store, you can see there was a place where you could purchase food and you could sit down and eat. And I would go there and sit, I would eat, and I would take field notes, just looking at interactions, who came in and out of the store. It was owned by a Dominican family, and it was a place where they worked, so you would see them managing the store on a day-to-day basis, and they had some employees there that would work in the back, preparing the food and serving the food. And one particular incident involved two men, not Spanish speaking. They had t-shirts that indicated they worked for a plumbing company. And there was an exchange between them. They went back and forth with the woman behind the counter. The two men were trying to order oxtail. She didn't understand what they were trying to say. And you could see their frustration mounting, where they were communicating in English and she was talking back to them in Spanish. And no one really interjected. There were people around. And it took one gentleman to finally come to ease that tension because they couldn't communicate. And they simply wanted to buy food and she was trying to serve them food. But it were these moments that caused tension. And again, caused that hyper awareness, okay, of being in a space and place where there's a different soundscape, okay, where there are linguistic transformations that have happened over time. There were conflicts over the landscape. Okay? This image is depicting what was a protest in a lot of ways, a gathering of a number of Puerto Ricans, elected officials as well, Okay, and you can see on that sign they are proclaiming we are Americans too. Okay, these are Puerto Ricans, U.S. citizens, and here this particular memorial to the 65th Infantry Veterans Park. Okay, the 65th Infantry is also referred to as the Borinqueniers, and it was a voluntary U.S. Army regiment, okay, of Puerto Ricans. They fought in World War I, World War II, and the Korean War as well. Okay, and there ended up being a lot of controversy over this memorial that was placed in a park in Buenaventura Lakes within the subdivision. One of my key informants, okay, during the hearing to have the motion passed to have this memorial, okay, erected there, and obviously money put into that. So it was also a question of taking some of the resources and financial the financial resources of the county and using this to build a memorial to individuals who in the Puerto Rican imagination are worthy, okay, of memorialization. My key informant said, you know what, Puerto Rico is another country, and was on record as saying that. Okay, made these individuals who fought in the US military appear unworthy. Then there was an entire kind of media coverage of the incident. And there were a lot of calling out of names, and it got really ugly. Individuals were labeled as racist, okay? Allegations put forth about how they felt about Latino leadership. Okay? So it became controversy, but over place and place identity, okay? Marking this space with a Puerto Rican presence. In this case, the name of an infantry, okay, of a volunteer US Army regiment of Puerto Rican. So again, these are the types of things I tried to document, okay? When I relocated in 2013 to the Deep South, I moved to the Mississippi-Tennessee border, okay, near Memphis, within minutes drive. Okay, I decided, you know what, this would be the perfect opportunity to look at Latino migration and the Latino experience, but comparatively. How does the experience of Puerto Rican US citizens who could rally around a common cause, had the power of citizenship, okay, voting rights. How did their experiences, okay, in Central Florida compare to individuals that were living in the Deep South, in Memphis, Tennessee, okay, or in what they call the Memphis Metropolitan Statistical Area, which actually includes the parts of Mississippi where I lived. Okay. So here, I've just given you some data which shows Tennessee, Mississippi, and a number of other states, okay, that between 2000 and 2011, okay, made the list for top 10 in terms of percent change in the Latino population. Keep in mind, even though these numbers are still small, if you're comparing the size of the Latino population in New York City, okay, or in the state of New York to these states, however, it's the percent of change that caught people's attention. Okay, these communities are growing so rapidly. And you can see this, okay, in this next slide, in this next image, okay? And this here talks about the Hispanic or Latino population in Memphis, Tennessee, okay? And here you can see there's actually been a decrease, okay, with certain demographics, okay? In particular, if you look 1980 at the non-Latino white population, right? And then you fast forward to 2010, you see that there's actually been outmigration. Right? But if you look at Hispanics or Latinos, 1980, they numbered 5,225. By 2010, okay, that population is at 41,994. Okay? You have an explosion of growth. Okay? 1990, you don't have that increase. But between 1990 and 2000, okay, so 2000 being key in terms of documenting those stories of those people who came before, you know, those pioneers, okay, that came to the city and settled there. Okay. But what I'm trying to do now are document, yes, those early stories, okay, but also the spaces and places where you've seen a concentration. And as a result, okay, restaurants, businesses, okay, other commercial enterprises that mark the landscape, okay, as an international space. So admittedly, okay, despite being a cultural anthropologist, an ethnographer, wanting to do research, one of the first things I did when I moved to that Mississippi-Tennessee border was look for common food, okay, food that reminded me of home. Okay, I had moved from East Harlem, New York City directly in 2013. And I was used to Puerto Rican food and Dominican food being right down the block within walking distance. And so I had to do a little bit of research, okay, to find what you see on this image is a restaurant owned by the two women that are pictured here. It's a restaurant called Mi Tierra that has Mexican food as well as Colombian food. Okay, so they have a combination. And during our oral history interview, they talked about having to introduce Mexican food because people were not familiar in this area with Colombian food. So to be competitive in the market, they needed both, that diversity, that variety in terms of cuisine. Okay. But they're located on Summer Avenue. And if you go into the interior, okay, it transports you. You feel like you're in Latin America, okay, from what you hear in terms of the music that's playing, to the ambiance, and certainly the cuisine, okay, the authentic dishes, and some that are a fusion, okay, where they've gotten creative. So what I ended up doing, 2016 to 2017, I paired up with the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is an institute for the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, to conduct oral history interviews with different restaurant workers, owners, managers. Okay, so I wasn't limited to Summer Avenue, but I quickly realized that there was this concentration, okay, in this particular place. And so here you see Cayman. This was a Venezuelan restaurant. Okay? La Herradura was a Mexican restaurant. And they also had a shop inside of the restaurant where you could buy different products that they brought in from different Latin American countries, okay? A lot of them from Mexico. And so I had an opportunity to meet some folks along Summer Avenue, and I got familiar with that space and place between 2016 and 2017. Okay. But it wasn't until 2019 that I really started to get into the ethnography, into participant observation, okay, into spending lots and lots of time just sitting in restaurants and observing and taking field notes, okay, as an anthropologist does. Okay. And the reason I got fascinated by this place in 2019 is because the Summer Avenue Merchants Association, okay, it's an association, it's a group of different merchants, not only restaurant owners, but other business owners in that vicinity, who come together, share information, support one another with some common goals, okay, trying to uplift the area. And one of the things that they were working towards was branding, okay, Summer Avenue, a portion of Summer Avenue, as Memphis's first international district. And they got some grant money. One of the things they did, okay, were put up what you can see in the image, different flags representing different countries. Okay? So there was this very intentional embracing of culture, of diversity. Okay? Part of what they were doing was drawing attention to the cuisine, the variety of cuisine. It wasn't just limited to Latin American cuisine, Venezuelan, Colombian, Mexican. Okay? You could find food from Vietnam. Okay? There was an individual who prepared food from Thailand, okay, in his diner that also served Southern food. Okay? So very creative fusion sometimes. Okay? There were different stores that served Arabic food, Middle Eastern food. Okay? In particular, Yemen was represented, well represented in terms of cuisine, in terms of what you could get at grocery stores. Okay? So there was a variety. And that association wanted to recognize that, recognize those entrepreneurs. But what became controversial were the flags, right? And the intent. Were they using these people to try and market a space? Was that problematic? Okay. Individuals complained about the Chinese flag in particular. Okay. They felt like it was problematic that a country that they thought of as communist would have representation, okay, here in the United States. The Vietnamese community actually mobilized, okay? And they spoke out against the Vietnamese flag being placed there. Why? A lot of them were refugees, okay? And they came from South Vietnam, and that flag to them represented, okay, those people that they fled from, okay? So that flag apparently was actually pulled down. Okay? The Israeli flag was questioned. Okay? Who was that representing? There was a store called Shop, okay, that had Jerusalem in the name, but it was actually owned by Palestinians. Okay? So they wondered, okay, who was being represented by the Israeli flag. So there was controversy, dissent, and that caught my attention. But first I needed to delve deeper into the history. Okay, that was always important to me. And that's what I did in Orlando. I wanted to know the deeper history of Buenaventura Lakes. Okay? And Summer Avenue has a very, very rich history, okay, with transformations to place identity at different historic moments. Okay? So that was of particular attention. For me, I started with archival research in Memphis. And what you're seeing here is an image that was pulled from the archive, and this represents a new development along Summer Avenue, okay? And this is in 1956. But we go way further back, okay? We can start further back in terms of Summer Avenue and its history, okay? It was a booming commercial space, okay? From the 20s to the 50s, okay? The automobile industry was growing, okay? And that was reflected along Summer Avenue, okay? It was a golden era in the 1930s, okay, for the motor court industry. So you had Summer Avenue lined with drive-in restaurants, gas stations, shopping facilities, okay? You have the first Holiday Inn in the United States built on Summer Avenue, okay? The city's first McDonald's is on Summer Avenue, okay? So it was a commercial space that drew people, okay, for things like food, entertainment, but also, especially over time, okay, for a really eclectic mix of different items, okay? And I'm gonna show you some images that really reflect that diversity, okay? But again, it was a commercial space. Here you see it represented in 1967. Now, I had some interviewees, okay, that talked about the 60s and 70s as a period of decline for Summer Avenue. And they associated that with the integration of schools and white flight, okay, from the area. Individuals going further and further, okay, out to the suburbs or the exurbs. Okay? And as a result, they argued that less desirable businesses started to move in. Title loan services, the infamous Admiral Bibbo Inn. Okay? So again, there was a transformation in terms of place identity. Okay? Yet still you had magazine articles, and I'll show you some of those as well, that were advertising to a particular social class, an upper social class, in terms of the advertisements. So still you had stores, okay, like the previous image showed you, okay, costly stores in the Summer Avenue Center. And this is just to give you some examples from Memphis Magazine. Okay, everything from Kitchens Unlimited to an Italian restaurant, okay, to spaces like Summer Sports Center, okay, where you could get outdoor entertainment. And this is what I was mentioning in terms of the 80s, okay, where I had conflicting types of representations of Summer Avenue. Okay? There was that decline, yet still, you know, here's Steinmart, okay, department store, being advertised, okay, to individuals that perhaps look like these models you're seeing here. But then also, you had a lot of complaints about the youth being drawn to Summer Avenue, okay, again, for entertainment, late night entertainment, gathering in the parking lots of a hardware center, for instance, okay, congregating in large numbers. So some of the memories that have been articulated. I've found 2 different Facebook pages that are completely dedicated to memories of Summer Avenue, okay? The Summer Avenue gang. And there's a lot of reflection on just hanging out in these spaces and places, okay? In the motels sometimes. Okay, sometimes the reputation is seedy, okay? But still, there was commercial enterprise. Okay? And again, an eclectic series of stores where you can find all types of merchandise. And here I just want to play for you an example, okay, of some of the memories that have been, in this case, put to music with images of an earlier Summer Avenue, okay, and its place identity.
our cars on Saturdays, shined our baby moons, till the air raid sirens warning blasted at the break of noon. Johnny waxed his galaxy, and I had a blue Malibu. And we'd drive out to the drive-in on Summer Avenue. I remember the Alamo Motel, where the secret lovers would go, and the old folks in their gliders on the porches of 11 Row. I kissed Roxanne at Skateland in the summer of '72, and she liked the park when it got dark on Summer Avenue.
So again, just to give you a sense of the way some people remember Summer Avenue as a space for entertainment. Fast forward to the contemporary moment, and the international presence, is what demands attention. And that's evident in the surrounding communities that have a Latino concentration in terms of residents. And that's reflected in the landscape. When you look at business signs, it's reflected in the school's demographic, in terms of the population, the students on the soccer team, the languages spoken in school as a first language. Summer Avenue is described as an ethnic culinary hub, the city's most diverse destination. One journalist wrote there are about 30 to 50 cultures represented in the stretch of Summer Avenue. Others say you can probably find 12 to 15 nationalities in restaurant options between, for instance, East Parkway and the interstate. And it's been a magnet for others to open businesses because of that reputation, that place identity. So in terms of the research I'm doing now, I've just posted some of my research questions in case you want me to speak in detail about anything in particular when we do our live Q&A. But what I'm thinking about are how migrants, and what some people, some refer to as new and aspiring Americans, because the terminology immigration, immigrant, migrant is sometimes thought of very negatively. So these are just new terms that I've been introduced to. So new and aspiring Americans, how are these individuals incorporated into the social, political, and economic life of communities, like Memphis, Tennessee, that were not traditional destinations of migration for Latinos. They had a historic Black-white racial binary. So how are Latinos and other immigrants navigating that binary? And how do they articulate their own racial, ethnic, and social class identities? And then I'm interested in those businesses, the stories, the oral histories that can tell us about the lived experiences of those people, those merchants, those business owners. When did the transformation happen? When did an international market first appear on Summer Avenue? And what have been the challenges for those individuals, right? What's the response to the branding of Summer Avenue? Again, I told you there's been a lot of critique, despite the embrace or the appearance, right, that immigrants are being embraced. So why the critique? Certainly the individuals that I've spoken to that are from other countries and that are business owners, when they hear about this effort to brand Summer Avenue, they're ecstatic. They think it'll be good for business. It'll diversify their clientele. So why the opposition? And then finally, food ways. And I love the study of food ways. How's food being used to build bridges across cultures in Memphis, Tennessee? So I'm gonna end there. And I wanna thank you for listening and joining me. And I hope to see you and speak with you more during our live Q&A.